Hi there, my name is Seeta, and I'm going to do a little presentation for you called Bring Out Your Sage, Teaching with Soul. And I thought I would do a little recording and put it into a presentation so you could see some of this, sit back, relax. I figured you were very busy with a lot of projects, and I think sometimes when we have that busyness, it's really nice to be able to just sit back and listen. So hopefully this will be helpful as much as it is a one-way transmission until, of course, you have a few questions that you may want to ask that I will be doing with one of your groups, I believe a day or so after the long weekend. So anyway, let us move on. I have a little agenda. I think this presentation is going to be give or take about an hour. So I hope you can sit back and relax because there's a few things to cover that I think are important. I am going to do a little bit on my story. Celia really wanted me to give you a little bit about that. So I will start with that. I do want you to think about uh, what's your best and worst learning experience and why was it good or wasn't it good? This is something that I think is worthwhile doing from time to time. And I am saying learning experience because I do think we get something as teachers when we put ourselves in the learner's shoes. And all of us have been learners at some point in time. And I think that is going to be important as we as I get through this presentation, and perhaps as a post reflection, it is something that you can do with what I have presented. So there's a little bit of interaction. Okay, to get everybody more or less on the same kind of wavelength, and I know you've done a lot with Celia, but I'm not really sure, all the different things that you have covered. So I am going to review a little bit of learning theory, kind of the core learning theory that I think is very important to teach both with technology and holistically. And of course, it is related to general learning theory that most of you are likely going to be quite familiar with, especially if you are a teacher. If you're not a teacher, then hopefully that will bring it together as well for you. And I do have some handouts, and I'll talk about that quickly at the end and show you that if you want those extra handouts, obviously not required reading, but, it would allow you to get a little bit more information if that's of interest. The second half of the presentation, I'm going to present a framework called PEAK, which is very much about teaching in this way and to think about how can we put a course together and orient it in a certain way. Anyways, it is something that I came up with. I've done workshops on it in the past. It was something that it was very much, in a sense, a summary of all my teaching over time and learning of holistic principles, and I think it really works, and it's something that is actually simple in the end. Once I've explained it, I think it's actually really simple. I always keep it in mind if I ever have to do something and put a course together, so hopefully it can help you as well, and perhaps act as a summary as you kind of come closer to the end of this course and move back into your life and perhaps some teaching later on in the fall. Okay, so just very quickly, my story. I do want to first thank Celia for inviting me back. So thank you, Celia, because I know you're probably listening to this as well, or you are listening to it. Why am I even saying probably? And it's been a while since I have been a speaker in her course. I have done this a number of times with Celia, so it's been fun. And anyway, going to my background, I have a science background. I'm a designer, as landscape architect in a previous rendition of my life, followed by an educational degree, and then actually ended up at OISE for 20 years. And that's where you're taking your course. And at OISE, I basically was an academic consultant integrating technology for teaching, learning, and research. and that was a lot of fun. A lot of different roles that I played. I was an online learning facilitator before it actually became popular. Or let's say it was in the initial stages, for most people. We were kind of early adopters on it. And we developed a teacher training program for, additional qualifications or AQs to be offered online, and a support strategy. So that was quite a while ago. And then over time, other courses, of course, went online, all kinds of graduate courses and whatnot. So we fundamentally used OISE's homegrown research, known as knowledge building. Well, that's one, and I am going to talk about it very, very briefly on one of my slides. And we use the principles in technology that was kind of the framework of how we approached the online learning, which I can say right now was discourse based, especially around fully online applications. And Pepper, what you're in, is also based exactly on that technology. And the researchers putting Pepper together are doing also all kinds of other features and researching how that works for education. So I was really lucky to be in the middle of all that kind of research at the time. And generally courses either were partially online or what we call adjunct and or fully online. And if you actually have a bit of a choice, and if you're new to this, it's all I used to tell that to various faculty around, oh, I want to go online. But, sometimes it's easier to start with an adjunct course where some of it's online, or just using some technologies. And well, I would say if you'd ever want to bring a full course online, it is really beneficial to say, in a certain part of your course, take that part online, don't meet face to face, and test it out. And or use a discussion type technology, something like that you're using in Pepper. Of course, they do exist in other kinds of environments, sometimes not with all the knowledge building principles built into it. However, so some basic forum kinds of applications do exist, and that's something that you could actually just do side by side with your face to face, just to get used to this kind of collaborative discussion. So I find that a little bit easier. Of course, with COVID now, people are they might be more forced to have, or are forced to have online, fully online courses. And, not always, how should I say, designed to be online, because this was like such a mad rush. So people just used the best technologies that they had on hand and tried to improvise. So if you're in a situation where you might need to teach in the fall, hopefully this can come in handy, because you could think about how you could use online and actually plan for it. Especially if you may or may not be going or have an interrupted season in the fall, something none of us know this year. Okay, what else did I want to say? Basically, through all of that online kind of consulting and working, that's how I met Selia. And actually, thanks to her, while I was pursuing my grad studies, while I was there as well, I discovered holistic education. And I can say I never did really look back. And I think it really expanded everything I knew about teaching and learning. So everything that you learn, in teachers college and in practice, I think it made me a better consultant as well. And I was also involved in a lot of institutional and research projects, and sometimes those combine. And so at one point, with our developing group, so the programmers, we created also a learning platform with knowledge building and other kinds of features to support learning as well. And in conjunction with an institutional learning management system, and I think you've got Quarkus right now. They had Blackboard at the time, and it just offered more flexibility and more features for educators. Um, versus, let's say, other content type courses that might be out there. So a lot of it has to do with what kind of content are you trying to deliver. But it definitely had, a lot of different features, and it had to fit a broad range of courses. So everything that I'm going to be talking about today, really, you need to think about that when you're trying to design for teachers, and what kinds of features that they're actually going to use. Very, very important. And of course, when with being in OISE, we were lucky because we could put some real extra features that are often not in those big systems that are often quite administrative, and really help different kinds of faculty teach in different ways, which is very exciting, and have that technology truly support the teaching and learning experience quite deeply. And, not all technologies out there do that, but, sometimes it's really knowing what to do that's actually more important. And then, sometimes you can adapt the technology a little bit. But if you have a technology that totally kind of fits with, learning principles, then, you just have a great combination. Okay, so I guess that kind of covers me at this point, because I'd really like to get on with what I said I was going to talk about. And I think that's it. Let's just get on with it. Next slide. Okay, this is an old slide, had it for years, but still worth it. And for most of you that are in Celia's course at this point in time, I'm sure you're quite familiar with the fact that we can either have student-centered, student-directed, or instructor-directed kinds of courses. Instructor-directed being more traditional, moving, across, that strip to, more negotiation and constructivist approaches. And I just wanted to, we are going to be talking about different pieces of this as I move through the next few slides, but I just really wanted to let you know it is a continuum. All those lines that you're seeing, they're arbitrary, and so we can kind of move a little bit more instructor directed, a little more student centered, and make decisions, depending on our content and where in our content. And this is where we really need to think about, how we're presenting and designing, our curriculum or lesson plans. So to get everybody on the, as I said, more or less the same plane, I'm just going to talk a little bit about that educator's role. And I've chosen 4 basic theories that I think are the most important, for at least for our purposes, to think about. And I'm sure many of you have heard this. So I'm going to try and get through this next couple of slides as quickly as I can. But, I'm not reading off, so I'm just kind of trying to talk as I go and look at these slides. So we have the behaviorist model, which is, the oldest version of them, of the models. Typical person there is Skinner. And this is very much about learning, where the stimulus is external. And, so it's this idea that there's some sort of response to an external, well, very typically right here, you're sitting back and listening, and I'm external, and as is this presentation, and you get to respond to that. Now we will have something a little different once I'm going to talk to a group of you, and there'll be a little bit of back and forth there. But at this point, this is actually quite behaviorist in some ways, except the way that Selia is planning the course. It's not behaviorist in general, because of course we are always going to be doing some transmission, and that is something that you'll be able to see later. So the behaviorist approach is generally an external response, and the student tends to be far more passive. Next, cognitivist, and that's Jay Bruner. And this is very much, if you're a teacher, you're very familiar with it. The idea of structuring content and learning activities, very much about translating for meaning, and facilitation, is a key aspect there, typical in education today, and kind of where more or less constructivism came from. And I am actually going to review that definition in about, as soon as this slide is over, so we'll talk about that in a second. The third one is social and situational, again a constructivist type of approach, L. Vygotsky, Lave Wagner, and I'm going to show a little bit on Garrison. It's a bit newer. But this is really social constructivism, and it's very much about communities of practice. It's where we participate. It's exactly what you're doing in Pepper and what you're doing in this course. And that is very typical for online. We generally have some sort of place where we can come together and have asynchronous discussions, and whichever way we arrange that, in teams and together. So that's something we'll talk about. But that is pretty key and has been a driving force from a theoretical perspective in the online environment for a long time. And then we have the humanist role, where we have people like Maslow, Carl Rogers, and of course others that at OISE we have Jack Miller, who is wonderful. And I would say this is the holistic principle, or it was a prelude to holistic education, facilitating the development of the whole person. And in fact, these are all psychological theories. And so, as we know, psychology and education pretty well went hand in hand when it came down to teaching and learning theoretical constructs, and how we can practice that. Okay, constructivism. If you're not going to do anything, this is the one thing you do need to do. This is the one thing everybody should memorize. So if this is new to you, this is really important. And for the rest of you, well, I apologize that I'm adding this slide in here, but I do think it's really key. The principle that we basically construct our understanding, we build our understanding on things that we already know. And we make our own rules and mental models. So it's really always adapting those models. And so we always have to decide, and find out from our students what's new, what do they know, and incorporate that in the course. So as it says here, constructivism, a philosophy of learning founded on the premise that we construct our own understanding of the world we live in by reflecting on our experiences. Each of us generates our own rules and mental models, which we use to make sense of our experiences. Learning, therefore, is adapting those mental models to accommodate those new experiences. And we see that over and over again in a course, and how people relate. They put up their hand, oh, I've got a question, this and this happened to me. And this is wonderful. And this is what we actually want to have happen in class. And as we teach our classes, if we have the opportunity to teach it more than once, we really can hone in on this and use it very well in our courses. So back to the social constructivism, I just wanted to kind of say what Vygotsky pretty well said, this idea of learning through social interaction and language. That was the key point. And it was this idea that you could get people, including the instructor, coming together to accomplish something which they might not have even been able to do independently. That's part of the point, and therefore learning together. And Lave and Wenger, this idea that, again, it's kind of what kinds of social engagements provide the proper context for learning. What kinds of social engagements? So with Vygotsky, it's about the social engagements and things that you might not be able to do on your own. And with Lave and Wenger, it's very much what kinds of engagements. So this is where we get to decide, because of course, we could have a whole course on this, on how to actually think of all different kinds of ways that we can do this online, even in, let's say, just a discussion forum. So I'll try to, there's going to be a couple of things I'll cover on that. Unfortunately, I can't go through all, but I think you guys are definitely researching that kind of information, and probably, and I know Celia is giving you a lot of good examples in her course. But the kinds too will depend on the content. So this is very much about general education and online, and things that relate to online learning and collaborative online learning. So this is the theory that I'm giving you. And another one is called Community of Inquiry by Garrison et al. And they basically, furthered these base philosophies and theories, and moved it into something more modern. This is a little bit more recent, probably about 8, 9 years old. Well, it's actually older, but I think this last part is, give or take, well, actually, I think it might be actually getting closer to 10. This idea of social presence, teaching presence, and cognitive presence. These are three things that are needed if you're going to have a community of inquiry, and especially online. And you probably can see that in your course. It's something you can think about, how do these three areas, how have they worked while you've been, discussing in the course on holistic ed and technology. And so social presence, it's very much about identifying with the community, that you feel part of it and trusting it, your personality is in there. The teaching presence, is very important. This is about the teacher, again, facilitating the cognitive and social processes, and making sure it's meaningful and worthwhile learning outcomes. And then even as that, especially when it's an inquiry based discussion, collaborative discussion based kind of thing, that's where the teacher needs to, inform, what's important. Sometimes get people back on track. Sometimes it's important, and sometimes we need to let it flow, because you'll see, as we want to be more holistic, we need to let that flow. But sometimes there are certain things that, we can't always go off topic, or we need to take that in a different forum that people can talk about that further. Sometimes we have to correct errors as well. And we want to summarize, how certain things are working with the class, perhaps each week, or whichever schedule that we have. And we always have to know that the teacher is there. That's the real key thing. Even if the teacher doesn't, it's not usually wise. Here's a little trick to answer all the questions, because it stops the conversation. We let that flow. We might ask a question or move it in a certain direction, but the students need to know the teacher is there. So that's key. So from that's what that means in this area, because really the conversation stops, and you can kind of think about that even in online forums, or let's say unbounded communities, because a course is a bounded community, but in an unbounded community, discussion may, just happens organically, but the best ones are the ones that are moderated as well. And then, of course, we have the cognitive presence, so that the learners can construct, again, all based on constructivist approaches, and confirm meaning through these sustained reflections and discourse that happens in the various forums and environments. And that's what the educational experience is, okay? Now, I'm coming back to knowledge building, because I talked about it in my story. Now, you can go grab this collective cognitive responsibility for the advancement of knowledge. It's actually still online. I, in fact, downloaded it the other day for somebody else. But, it's just beautiful, because it's just the basic principles. Again, these are all basic principles that, you have a bedroom, and you have a bed in it, and you have a dresser in it, you have a night table, and you have a light. I mean, those things just don't change. We do get new technologies, and we can do different things with it, but the basic principles, stay the same. That doesn't mean that we're not improving and more and new theories come out, but these are tried and true. So I just wanted to make sure that you knew of these. Okay, so very quickly, the idea of knowledge building, again, collaborative and discourse based, although knowledge building is not just about online learning. In fact, we're the ones that made it more online. It was actually studies that were far more about classroom and technology and classroom environment. Uh, uh, we actually brought it more to a solely online kind of application. Still, the basic principles, you'll see some overlap, but I think you'll see how this is important. The idea of real ideas, authentic problems. Um, Learners need to care about them, so you need to make sure that that's there along the way. And with collaborative discourse, it's just wonderful because you can always mold that. It's a little bit different than just pure resource-based type learning. Improvable ideas, that's really important. That it's that everybody and the standards of practice that you put together for your students so that they understand, here's the guidelines for the course. All ideas are treated as improvable, and that gives that safety measure. So that's there. Idea diversity, that's really important for learning, and I think this is where knowledge building just, is wonderful. It's we can scaffold ideas. So think of a scaffold. It helps you kind of get up the building. So we can scaffold ideas. In other words, we could categorize them in our discussion right from the beginning and get people to understand so that they can feel safe with putting theories or contrasting theories and opinions together without getting into arguments or feeling bad, or the fact that somebody, oh, I don't want to respond to that because I don't agree. So it's this idea that we could say every time, here's an idea. Now, here's my opinion of the idea. And then the next person says, oh, I have an alternate opinion of an idea. And then, or I have a theory. Here's a new theory. Or here's new information from the outside. And so we scaffold these things and we can bring it into the conversation and somebody can respond to that. And then we can decide, how meaningful is that to whatever it is we're discussing and moving into whichever direction. So this really helps people. And I always try to get teachers to think about their key scaffolds. I mean, these are normal, like opinions, theories, new information, alternate theories, alternate opinions are, kind of the standard type of scaffolds that you might want to use in discourse, and get everybody to use them. And nobody gets hurt, and I think that's important. Collective and democratic responsibility, that's actually 2 in 1. Just this idea that everyone's empowered, and of course, everybody's responsible, to share the innovations and advancement of knowledge. And by the way, all of these things that when we are doing any form of discourse, we definitely have to think about marks. So, and, so we want to make sure that marks are included in this, because people tend to do things when, unfortunately, when, at least if there's a course that, there's marks. There needs to be marks. Otherwise, they don't want to do it. A lot of people don't like to do the extra because they're busy. There's always a few that do. Okay, epistemic agency. That's where the students are responsible for their learning. And these are, again, things that you set out at the beginning, that you say, and get people to understand that in themselves. Now, the online is definitely getting people to understand that, is becoming far more common, and people almost expect it these days, too. Another long word, symmetric knowledge advancement, the idea that the expertise is distributed. This is like where you guys have teams and, you summarize and you get an opportunity to moderate, that kind of thing. Pervasive knowledge building, that's important. Pervasive, meaning inside and outside of the class. It's like we can bring stuff from the outside in, And finally, rise above, which is moving towards conclusions, of course, and inclusive principles of all that idea diversity and the scaffolds that you were doing and the improvable ideas, and bringing that to some sort of very interesting summary and higher formulations, like especially if, depending on the course, I mean, for example, if it's a science course and you really do have a theory, and then you're bringing that together because you're actually in a discovery mode. It's different when we're looking at theories and research and trying to summarize and understand it and give examples of it. It's a little bit different than a more creative or scientific kind of content. So in the end, what's important about all this theory stuff that I've been talking about, and I hope it's been helpful just to perhaps give that summary, but it's all this idea that learning is active, it's meaningful, that's key. This is going to overlap. Situational, it's based on experience of some kind. It's cumulative, that's really important. It's a social activity, right? And, we're talking about community building and encouraging each other. So what about technology with all that? Well, I've talked a little bit throughout, a little bit here and there about how these relate to technology, and you've had some experience with that now. So the most important thing, as I alluded to before, is this idea that, the technology needs to support the teaching and learning experience. So if you have a choice. So for example, with Pepper, there are certain features that, you don't get off the shelf someplace else. And if you're based on, discussion type applications that, are very useful in the type of course material and you have, then this is where you get, like a rise above. I think Pepper has that. I'm not sure, but I haven't looked at the more recent uh, rendition of it or version of it. But Knowledge Forum used to have that you could basically collect the notes, bring them together, and make a rise above. In other words, it would be a summary note, and all those other notes that you would click on would actually be under it, and it would not interfere with, just having one note after the next in the discussion, so that we finally say, like, we almost summarize these kinds of things. And so those kinds of technologies are there. And in a lot of forums, some of that is or is not possible. And the other thing in Pepper and in Knowledge Forum is the fact that you can link across forums, to that note or to this note. And that's getting that cross forum. What I learned last week, wow, that relates to something I learned this week, and I link to it, and it's easy to do that. Not all forums allow you to do that. And so, the technology, it affords a certain type of learning. That being said, I always, even with less, um, you know, less advanced technologies for exactly what you need to do around discussion, let's say, if you know what you're trying to do, then you can make that technology work. That being said, there's all kinds of other technologies, things like the learning or content management systems, LMSs, quite often very administrative, but always have some learning uh, tools. They're really tools. And something like video conferencing, which is the next one, some sort of real-time ability to connect, obviously places for resources and or copying and pasting content and having a next book kind of thing work, a place to do videos, that kind of thing. I think they're getting better over time, but they definitely have the administrative component and keeping track and being able to mark and set that kind of system up. And of course, obviously, any kind of big institution tends to have an LMS because, they have to get all that content and they have to get the marks and all these other administrative pieces together very quickly as well, in a central spot. So, but you could perhaps, use, for example, something like Selia is doing, Pepper as an adjunct, and then, stay more for the learning part in a different kind of technology. So if you have some choice, then that's always good. And, asynchronous is key when we're doing online learning, because especially if we have people that are across timelines. Talking heads, which means just doing a video of yourself or a presentation like this, forums, and where we're discussing presentations by people in your class, and they too could do talking heads or exactly what I'm doing here. A place for resources, obviously, and a place that students too can add resources and create a little library. Then the other kinds of technologies typically are simulations, which sometimes are a bit more static and sometimes they're very interactive, like in the medical field. Of course, we have mobile applications as possibilities. You have to decide what is inside your main. If everything is online, let's say this is a fully online course, what's in your main technology, like your homeroom. That's, we're going to talk about it. It's exactly a classroom. That's the next point. And what isn't. And maybe I try a few other kinds of technologies, like, real time, you can use Zoom, but we have to be careful as teachers, because where is that information? Where is that content, especially when we're using some of these freebies that are out there, and, got to be careful with where that content is located when we're working with children and other people. At least in a bounded educational system, that information isn't going anywhere else. So that's a separate issue. Then we have the guest speakers, field trips. You can think of it as field trips. There are places that you can go and or report back, and places to go online. Of course, evaluation, assessment, rubrics, guidelines, standards, expectations, benchmarks, that's the person. All need to be taken into consideration with the technologies and or, how you're going to plan it, especially if it's fully online. That's not something I can get into because that's just a whole other area, but I think that might be something Selia is discussing. I'm not sure. But it is key. I mean, you have to think about that unless it's, some sort of course that is just a workshop. And you have to think about technology, as I said before, as a classroom, because this is the experience the learners have. And as you know, with Selia, she themes everything, and I think that's really important. I always say, when you have your introductory thing, if you're teaching history, well, get them to introduce themselves as a historical figure, their favorite one, and get them to learn, the key technology pieces that are very, very important to learn: uploading, making a note, doing a few things that they need to do in that activity. That's you kind of very quickly get through the technological glitches now. So basically, what are we saying here? We're saying technology or learning, or technology and learning, right? So a lot of people that I see, they go, oh, here's the new thing, here's this, here's that. Well, I'm big on, making pilots on some small little area, but, if, it's sometimes keep it simple, stupid, the KISS rule. You're better to use less technology, not necessarily the most, the newest, latest, greatest straight away, especially if you're not comfortable with it, or just for a certain part of the course, as a project or something like that, so that you can pilot it and see how it feels. Because you don't want to get, in the next part that I'm talking about, you don't want to get into the point where the technology takes over and you can't be who you are as a teacher, and you're pulling your hair out, and it's just, what am I going to do, right? And you're working day and night. And I've seen people, that's happened. So we do really need to be careful with it. So I really suggest you always choose. It's better, you can set up you can do everything we've talked about here, and you'll see how this integrates with the next section. And you'll be able to do that even if you keep it really simple. So the next section is about the holistic approach. As we said, it started with that kind of humanistic approach in psychology as well. And I think one of the key things here that I want you to think about is integration. That's it. It's integrating. It's integrating everything, really. We like to have those ahas, but the difference here, if we're taking a holistic approach, is that space for that personal transformation. Now, we can't control when a student, oh, Let's make sure they transform. Well, that you can't do that. But we can put the space there for it, right? And we can make sure the way we ask questions and the way we theme and the different ways that we can manipulate that material just a little bit differently in order for that to happen. Because what we're thinking about, by the way, both you as a teacher and the student are people. So this is about the whole person, and you're included. There's the difference. And so we want to include mind, body, soul, and spirit. You know, spirituality and education, what does that look like? Again, a different course, but, you know, but, and it's not just about different people's orientation that's, let's say, in different traditions. It could be, but it's, you know, what does that mean inside ourselves, right? And to be able to get to that little spot that seems really meaningful. And, you know, how do we use our body? How do we use our mind? The natural rhythms. It's definitely social, emotional. It's definitely head and heart. I once did a presentation with Selia on that, but, you know, in India, they have a word called chitta. And it's one word and it means head and heart, depending how you use it in a sentence, but it's one word. They don't have a separate word for that. And in fact, today, you know, if you look at heart math, and there we have neural nets in our heart. And the newest research, you know, it's kind of like a little brain in our heart, and it knows before your head. Your head's logical and has to, that it's so interesting. And you can look at heart math online, and Greg Braden, he's done a lot of work on that, and it's just very, very interesting about connecting head and heart. Very, very important. And this is something we want to do. And cherished older traditions have been talking about this for, you know, ever, and this is something we want to bring into that classroom, that we're not just teaching above the neck. And so other things that include things that might be more holistic: nature, creativity, and any kinds of fields that associate with that. That's great, because I used to teach creativity and design, and, you know, it fits in beautifully. But if it's not a necessarily creative topic, but how could you fit creativity in it, right? And finally, contemplation and mindfulness, you know, silence, especially if you're working, you know, with kids. You know, I think it's good for adults as well. And it's that time to rest. Maybe it's even part of the course, to just stop and get people to have some sort of practice. It could be prayer as well. It could be just walking around the block and people could report back on it. And maybe how does that relate? How does that stillness or stopping something, you know, in a project relate to their learning? And this is something that they could have, you know, a reflection on, or could be part of the course as well. So it's just different ways of how can this fit into your content. The point is that the teaching approaches support integration and connection. And obviously that means inclusion. So for just 1 second before we go to this last part, of which is the framework that hopefully will help you a bit, let's just stop for a minute and close our eyes. Breathe deep for a second. And let's just kind of digest all that theory and everything we've been talking about. And let's just settle it and be ready to move into a new space. Okay, you can open your eyes. Hopefully that settled it. So now we're going to go into this little part here at the end, the second. It's not going to be a half. It's not going to take, I think, quite as long, but there's a few things to say here as well. So the framework that I've put together is PEAK: presence, engagement, atmosphere, and craft. Presence is basically you, the teacher. It's definitely the content because you are the content provider and representative, but it's also your feelings, your energy, your authenticity, that being there, you know. So we talked about teacher presence in the form of the garrison, which is definitely for people to know that you're there. But this is about really being there, and compassion is part of this as well. And um, there's a sense of who you are comes into this. So it's a little bit different than style. And we all have some different styles, or we change our style up a little bit, but there's a style that we feel comfortable with and how we can talk naturally. So I think that's important. But I'm not talking about, oh, what's your present, and I'm, flipping my hands all around, which maybe I do, but it's really who you are. Engagement is the learner. That's what it is. It's that experiencing, understanding. It's why we're doing all of this in the first place, for the learner, right? Atmosphere is that space, the safety, the milieu, the theming, the, technology that you're using. And typically, it is the classroom. And you'll remember when you were in the younger elementary years, I mean, they'd always spend so much time, the teachers, creating the nice space. And, the older you got, it wasn't so much. So I think it's really important, at least to have something, it can be, if it's in a classroom, it can be just some little, I don't know, sometimes it's a fountain, or or something that relates to your course material. And again, I think it might be nice to have just some sort of forum or something in your technology classroom that does something a little bit different, or part of a project that, kind of veers into a discussion that is very special to people. It doesn't necessarily be from Marx, it's more the special side. And it could be a picture, or music, those kinds of things are really important online. There's other ways, or a quote forum, that people do, that kind of something nice that makes it, again, appropriate to your content, but something that puts a little bit more of a personal slant. Like, again, it could be quotes if it was, you're doing science and physics and you just have one area that maybe have nothing to do with the actual content that you're teaching, but that everybody goes and looks at some sort of very interesting quote from, past scientists, and shares them, and, whether it relates to something they're doing or not. So you want to have an atmosphere, and I think, it brings something together. We want to almost create family if we can. It is a bounded community. The idea of Kraft, I spell it with a K because it's special. It's not as in the cheese or the company, but it's also not as in the C, because it could be, if you're doing something creative per se, it could be craft, but I wanted it's craft. And because this is your strategies, your delivery, your methods, the hows, the whens, but it's it's uh, it's special because you're going to see how these work with the other three. And so how does technology fit in there? Well, we already can see experience, understanding has, some of the same wording. Some of the stuff that we've been talking about in the theory are going to overlap in here quite nicely, and you'll see it fits in there. But we are adding a little more the minute it comes down to trying to do something holistically. So this is just a quick framework. It's something that you can take a look at if you would like to have the handout. The idea that we have the teaching strategy and the teacher presence and the space and the meaning and understanding, which is the learner. Just different words, the idea of role, journey, delivery, and safety. Within the strategy or method, we have teaching strategy and learning strategy, right? And notice the learning strategy is closer to the learner. And what do they know and what don't they know? So we think about that and new things and don't know. Right? And this is their experience. As we get closer to this, what's relevant in the space, what's digital, what kind of digital, maybe it's just one kind of cool little digital game or something that makes things different as well. Then we have, the idea of sacred or something special. This is this idea of making place. Definitely safety. Safety is key here, as we've discussed before. And domain. This is your area. This is you. Domain as in content, but domain as in service and care and who you are and being authentic. And all around it, we develop a community and that kind of source of wisdom to uncover it. So we have a blank one here, so you could, fill it in and think of like, what are you doing now? What's the purpose of the course in the center? And what are you doing? And of course, how to plan ahead for that at the higher level. Here's a few examples. I'm not going to go through all of them because you can read that later, as this is exactly the same thing where, this idea of Kraft, the content delivery part, we adjust it. It's the idea of answering why for the engagement and evidence-based strategies and models that we've been talking about. That's where this fits in. Pacing is very important, especially online. And if we want to be holistic, we want to pay attention to the pacing. Engagement, what's important, obviously who people are, what they know, don't know, relating to their lives, as we said, making meaning. But here's what's important. What's hard and scary? That's really important. And that allows us to think about the timing and the order of some of the material or content. I've done, I'm sure if you've ever taught a course and you have the opportunity to do it, a few times, I've changed things around based on that. That's a very important question in general, which I think it'll come up again. And the idea of atmosphere that I think we've talked about enough. And there's expectations here in the center. So that's key. So now I'm going to, kind of dim the background and say, well, there's technology. So where does it fit? It's, it's pretty much here in atmosphere, it's your classroom. And it can be how, it might go over to Kraft because sometimes we use technology very, very specifically to do something as a delivery for a very specific part of our course material. But the other thing to think about, and it's two-way arrow in all cases, is, how does it relate to your presence? How does the presence help you? How do you relate your presence using that technology and vice versa, as well as to how does it help student engagement? How can students help the technology too, right? Or how basically, long story short, I think you kind of get it. It's this idea of how do each of these areas work with technology from both sides. And I think the big questions that I have there, or sorry, not questions, well, they are questions, what, when, where, why, how idea is a craft. I do when. In terms of a holistic approach, it's definitely why. I mean, why are we doing a certain delivery method, usually based on the content, and it's definitely how. But when is really important. Timing, pacing, as I said. So I like to really highlight when it comes to craft. After we choose the type of craft and different kinds of strategies for the teaching and learning. So why? Well, first of all, both teacher and student are who's, so that's always there. But Why for student? Because you know what? The whole thing, as I think I said before, why? We're doing this whole course for them. The whole point is engagement. And, teachers are about what? When it comes down to content, right? But what else are you, right? You, I think, is also important. So the last part of this is, well, how do you start to think about, putting all your materials together for this? And I just wanted to add this right at the very end so that, it kind of works with Peak, but that you could think about how to chunk your materials in a more holistic way. And of course, TTT, I call it TTT. Jack Miller, holistic curriculum, works at OISE. Wonderful way. It's called Transmission, Transaction, and Transformation, TTT. And I just find it so easy, and I can fit everything in this. And so it's the 3 learning orientations. I will say that it deals more with the idea of craft, right? And engagement. So we're kind of thinking about craft and engagement, but you're still in it and the place is still there. So they do interact, but the actual strategies here, transmission, transaction, transformation, is around interaction, right? And so you would use it as you're thinking about what kind of strategies and delivery modes and lesson plans I'm putting together, and how and why and when, and what kind of pacing it is, with the fact that it's all about why in terms of the engagement and the learner. So these three types: transmission is one way, transaction is 2-way, and transformation, it's connected. That's really what that means. So let's go to the next slide, where I have a handout on this that you can take a look at it. Transmission is one way. It's definitely what I like to call the sage on the stage, people that are great orators and you could listen to them forever. I'm probably not one of those, but in any case, I've always wanted to be. But this is the lecture, this is the talking head in the video. It's a simulation. It's the reading. It's the handout. It's the story, the narrative of some kind. It's the one-way transmission. And what I always like to think about, and this is how I think about it, is what needs transmission in my content. Remember how I said things can be scary or hard? That's where you need a lecture sometimes, or a video to explain something, or a paper, or something. This is get the basic out so that there's some basic information that they need, so that the students can move on, because you're probably teaching them something else. They don't have to discover everything. And as you can see, holistic includes all of it. It isn't just going out and, I'm going to be a tree hugger. No, no, no. And it's definitely very much about incorporating all components of learning, right? All components of learning. So what I would ask myself also is, what can they do without transmission? So that's how I would look at my content. What can they do and what needs it? Okay, so transaction, that's the sharing, that's the 2-way or group way. There's the meaningful, this is your typical constructivism, social learning, as you can see, cooperative learning. I also have a little activity, and you can take things like think, pair, share, and translate them into forums and have them, just 2 people discuss it in their private little note online. I don't mean their email, but usually there's always a private messaging, and then, have them share things or do gallery walks and role play. All kinds of wonderful ways to do this as well. I don't recommend doing hundreds of these things for every single little thing. People, there is a pacing again where, people like to read something, then we discuss something, now we have to do some things together. We don't want to make it too difficult to connect. So, and depending who you're teaching and if they're adults, and whether they can get together, these are all things we have to consider. But this is definitely the Socratic method, the question and answer, what I'm going to be doing with you, discussion group projects, learning from experts. All that is included, and your knowledge building and all the previous theory that we were talking about, that's a basis and core in all teaching today, in at least in our public system, not necessarily in university, but definitely in K to 12. So finally, what makes it a little more different is the transformation, which is this idea of connected, you know you know, and understanding how that content relates to you, your growth, your evolution, really your being. And as I said, we're just trying to set up the possibility for deep revelation. So we want to think about activities that spawn personal meaning. So a lot of reflective activities can do that. But again, make it really meaningful to the course, because a lot of teachers will, oh, here's a reflection, you're going to do this. They just, there's some standard things people do and they work, but maybe you can add something to that. If you're definitely in class, if you can go outside into nature, those kinds of things, even figure something out in your course that you can do that, and figure something creative out that they can do, so there is that kind of hand body eye coordination, all of that sensing, smelling, using our bodies is key. And so but online sometimes you can't do that, but we can have a little bit of contemplative time. Even I did that in between our two sections. So portfolios, mind mapping, the sleep on it, intuitive responses. We could even, the idea of getting people to do intuitive responses on something, you could actually have an activity on that. So it's always interesting. You want to be real, you want to be human, and I think this is the part, this idea of where you want to be part of this transformation as a teacher, and that's where teacher presence comes in a lot as well. And as a teacher, you share things as well. You share things as well. And here's just a quick diagram, TF meaning transformation here in the center, TA, which is transaction and transmission. And I just wanted to show you, whether it's half and half, or, quarter and three quarters, or, even or not even, you can look at your content and say, which pieces need to be transaction, which pieces make more sense to be transmission, where are there opportunities for transformation? And it may be through the pacing that happens as well. But if we plan it that way, there's no actual rule that it has to be one way, and certain content tends to work a little bit better one way or another. And if you're online, you're going to sometimes have to get creative yourself. So, you too need to be holistic, and think about different ways, you can do things. So that leads me to the next one. And was going to say, notice the spaces in here. You want to always leave a little space. So this is the bigger one, and it's the same basic Kraft presence engagement. So peak, presence, engagement, atmosphere, and Kraft. And it's subdivided. I'll just explain it briefly. With teaching strategy, learning strategy that we saw, and the teacher, it's this idea head thinking. This is your content, the expert participant or content representative. And you don't have to feel like you know every answer. That's okay. And actually online in discussion, it works quite well that way anyways. There you see, you want to have your heart and head together. Here on this side, we have the heart, this idea of the feeling mind versus thinking heart. And this is where we have that authenticity. This is where we have that soul. And if we can combine it with that sacredness that is in the atmosphere, this, but definitely relevant, So we've talked about atmosphere, the learner engagement, meaning and understanding. So building on existing, and misconceptions we need to, think about. Balancing, and including and creating content, new and things that you don't know. And of course, this idea of designing the experience. This is what you're doing. That's the craft. This is the invention. This is where you get to test things out and really think about, how. There's how everywhere, and who. So that's why I kind of went. The when from before was very important. The why and the what, and of course the where. So obviously these combine, here at the side, strategy plus meaning, strategy plus presence, presence plus space, they kind of go all around and around. And I think it's always nice to think of it in each of those ways. So when you have a chart like this and you fill some of it in, you can actually just look at both sides and look around how that's working for you. And these words here at the outside, I just want to explain them very briefly because I think words are really key. And for us to try to think more holistically, and whether it's online or not, it's, what are the words we're using? How are we thinking about it? How are they thinking about it? So you had the earth, fire, air, and water groups. Celia has themed things, but I think it's really important for us to think, how are we thinking of ourselves? The guide, model, sage, wizard, magician, shaman, helper, counselor, or whatever other word you might come up with. Words make a difference and help you bring your presence out. And this idea of inspiration, right? Inspiration. The spirit's in you. So how can you be inspirational? Just by being yourself helps. How do you think about yourself? That's why you might use some of those words. And again, atmosphere, this idea of rites of passage. What is the rites of passage that your students are going to try to get through in your course? This idea of awe and wonder, adventure, imagination. I love those words. There's way more words that we can use. These are just a few, whether that's through the atmosphere or through learner engagement. You definitely want learners to have awe and wonder, but can they think about things? How can you explain and make some of the projects feel like an adventure? And by the way, it's not adventure if you know the answer. So, but making it fun as well. Curiosity, obviously we want that. And alchemy, right? Especially with the craft, and all of these things, is we want that alchemical building, and melding. And alchemy, is that idea, just of, the philosopher's stone within us, that's goes through a process, and then, there's an enlightenment. And we get that through curiosity and spawning it. So this is all about just creating the space within, the small units, and we do them one unit at a time. So obviously we have the beneficial discipline skills, grounded questions, all that happens too, right? So this chart can also be used to think about, how have you done it before? How would you like to do it? Or as you put different pieces of information in, how, just the overview, you'd like to use those squares just to kind of give me the basic structure of my course or lesson plan. And by the way, it's not that every lesson plan has to have every last little thing perfect. It's the overall experience that we're trying to find in the course, but the more you can do, the better. So, how much, is the craft working? How much is the learner engagement happening in there? Have you done anything with atmosphere? What is the teacher presence, And is anything lopsided? And is that okay for the course? And is that, it would be good if that were the case. We want that. In other cases, we wanted it maybe perhaps a little bit more even. And I even have these extra lines in here, and that's just so that, this is more about known and previously known, and this is things that, are new and don't know, and I might need to do more on that and less on this. Sorry, based on, previous courses so I could get a little bit more specific. And by the way, with the blank ones, you can make some of your own wording here, as long as it's about engagement, the craft, the presence, and the atmosphere, that has very specific words to your course and course material. It's really great as a post course self-evaluation. Like, how do you think you did? Which will help you remember, and then just use that sheet, and then maybe at the side make a couple of notes, um, so the next time that you might be preparing it, that you have a sense of what you might want to change up a little bit, or a new technology that comes in there for you. What we definitely don't want is this. Everything has been dimmed. Atmosphere is all about technology. It's skewed out there. You're barely, touching these other areas. And, obviously you're going to do some craft because you have to do something. And, you definitely have the teacher and you have some content. And the learner is there. How much they're engaging is a whole other story. And if you're all harried out about this and you don't have anybody to help you, and the students don't know what they're doing either, although usually you'll get a few that can help out, but or if you've got a TA or something like that. But I know people that have torn their hair out and work day and night, and then it's hard to have that teacher presence, right? I mean, people try, but you don't want to kill yourself. So choose wisely. I think that's the most important thing. I see people too often trying to do something and it's too hard and too soon. So be aware. It's much more important to kind of really get this together and make this a bit simpler. And students like simple too, right? Because they have to do a lot of work, and get interesting with the projects and what they have to do, because we can do things with real base technologies, and then pilot some of the interesting ones that you think might work for your course, because there definitely are some interesting ones out there, right? So I'm coming back to the very last thing, where I would say, as a learner, hey, what are your best or worst experiences? And what I would ask you to do is actually fill that out here yourself, based on those 4 areas of peak. And figure out, what was great about that learning experience. Was it the teacher? Was it this? Was it that? Quite often it's the teacher that stands out for us, So why? And maybe you can't put your finger on it, but, just put her name there, there was something special, right? And sometimes you have the worst. What did didn't they do? Now, definitely use these as, for planning as well. They're basically the same thing. I just have it here as a learner, but they're basically blank, and you can use it for planning and for evaluating your own teaching course afterwards as well, and assessing that. And that's it, basically. So I do want to say thank you. And I do wish you all the very best. I know it's been a bit longer, but I hope it's been helpful. And I hope this is a summary that brings some things together. And I just want you to remember, bring out your sage, because you're important, and that is your presence. And that will make all the difference in the world, in any course, if it's holistic. And I think that's one of the most important things. Let me just show you one quick little thing here. Is that here are the handouts. I do have this handout, Bring Out Your Sage, Teaching with Soul, where a lot of this information that I've said on there's a few other things too, but there's the community of practice, there's a bit on constructivism, a little more on that transmission, and some of that information that I had there. I also have a few questions here that if you want to answer them, I use that in a workshop, but it might be helpful for you. But you might like this, and I really wanted to include that. And I thought I might as well include the whole thing. These are from a different workshop, but this is how you can use this little grid to help you design your course. This is how I do it. Transmission, transaction, transformation. Here's the purpose and the content. There's the strategy idea. there's how I'm going to do it. Here's why. And basically, I just, will whatever, it might be a unit or a lesson plan. I mean, first you do the large scale and then you get a little bit more detailed. But depending how many key units you have and what you're doing with the units, you could have and decide based on what we were talking about before. This list here, I think, gives you a pretty good general list to pick from things that you can use that and modify them. I'm not sure. I'll ask. I mean, if you do want this, it is another. It's basically on online learning. And I do have some of this information, some of the theory. I think there's a little bit of repetition, but this is a lot about online discussion and communities of practice, as well as the knowledge building is in here, like the basic principles, and a little bit on assessing, if that would come in handy if you think you're doing that. And I think that's that one. And I do have 5 cooperative strategies. That comes from basically just a site. The key ones: think, pair, share, 3-step interview, round table, galley walk. These are kind of fun. I mean, you can pretty well look up cooperative strategies anywhere. I'm sure many of you know your own, and just get creative to put them online. So I do have those handouts, and if you find that useful, I hope you do. And I wish you well in your course, and I wish you well if you're going to teach in September. So all the very best to you, and you take care. Bye. Oh, I guess one thing we're going to do is, I guess I'm going to talk to a few of you in next week, or the week after the holiday. Okay, bye-bye.